Let's continue to talk about the constructor function from the dynamic array. So let's compare again. When we do the static array, we have our array. You see here is we're using the static memory. You have data type, then your array name. Right away you have the square bracket to specify the capacity. In the static array, you have to have your capacity is the constant number. So that's for our assignment 3. But in assignment 4, we want to create a dynamic array. So that's why the dynamic array, we need to use the new keyword. So that's why here in the data attribute, we don't have the array. Instead, actually, we have the data type pointer values. So this values pointer will refer to the dynamic array we create. And here our capacity also become a variable. If you're still a little confused about the static array or dynamic array, here let's show you. Did you remember that before you in 110 or 165, that's how you create this array. So this array, you have the constant int cap, then you can specify a variable as the static array. That will be in the memory, in the stack memory. But here, be careful. Your capacity you use, if you can either use the instance value, or if you want to use the variable, only can be the constant variable. That's a static array in the stack memory. But now we also can create the dynamic array. So if you want to create a dynamic array in heap memory, remember we're using the pointer to refer to the new array we create. When you're using the new keyword, you're still using the similar syntax, but since you have the new keyword, you will create the memory in the heap memory. But here, since you use the new, we allowed the capacity here can be a variable. But here, the new actually just allocate the memory. So that's why you need to use the pointer. So this pointer should match the data type as the array data type you create here. So that's different between the static array and the dynamic array. One is using create the memory in the stack memory. The other is in the heap memory. So on the other hand, let's go back to see our header file. So that's the header file I showed you earlier, right? So let's start create our dynamic array header file. So we still have the template. We're using the type name is a T. So our class name is dynamic array. So be careful now. Your data attribute, you have two data attributes. One is T, but this one becomes the T pointer because that's a pointer to refer to the dynamic array. So then your T data type cap capacity. Okay, so that means rephrase that. That's the T data type pointer refers to the dynamic memory. So then our cap is a data attribute as well. So that's why you see we use the lowercase to represent is the variable. But here our constructor. Our constructor now we will specify the capacity passing through the parameter. So then that's our constructor. So that's the constructor prototype. So continue, how should we implement this constructor? So you will see the same thing, since that's the template. So that still is the temp. Okay, so that's our function implementation. Our dynamic array still is even the constructor, they are still is the template function. So that's we have our function name associated with your data type. Then we link to the constructor. But now this constructor actually is, you need to pass in the capacity. So afterward, you will see constructor, we want to initialize everything, right? So that's why, right. So here, when you want to initialize, you will new your array here. And constructor work is initialize everything. So that's why the first thing, that's create our array. So we need to using the new keyword to create the dynamic memory. So then that's why here is this value will, right? So you see that's your for loop. So can you tell me your for loop what you need to assign? Very good, right? In the for loop, you should assign each element in the array. So that's why here, since you're using the pointer to refer to this array, so that's why here your pointer will be your array name. So that's your I equal to what? Again, right, default value. Don't forget your T. So that's your default value T. So that's why here, that's your constructor. But one thing is we need to be careful. Now this constructor, actually this cap actually is when we create the array, you will pass in this cap. Is this cap the same as this cap? No, they are different. So that's why this cap is passing by variable. So on the other hand, we need to assign this cap passing by variable. This cap is passing by the variable through the constructor when you create a dynamic array. But here, this cap, remember, this cap belongs to the object. So that's why we need to assign this variable cap into this cap. So that's why we can hold in our cap in each dynamic array. So then what else we need? Now you will say, right, we have the dummy, right? Okay, if you want, right, we still can have a dummy. So that's why the same thing, you can have the T dummy. Then you have the T dummy value, of course, you should assign here. And also the same thing, you still need to equal to T. Okay, so everything sounds okay for your constructor, right? But be careful, we need to have default constructor. So that's why here our constructor has our passing variable. Then kind of we don't have default constructor. The first thing you need to know, what is default constructor? Usually in C++, when we say the default constructor, means you don't have parameter list in your constructor. Or if you have the parameter to pass in the constructor, right? We just need to make sure we will assign the default value in the prototype. So here one thing is actually in order to fulfill, we have default constructor. So you need to make sure the parameter you passing in the constructor, we need to give them the default value. So on the other hand, when the user define a default dynamic array without the capacity, we will using 2. So that's here our constructor function. So after we finish that implementation for the constructor function, so let me talk again about the default constructor. So earlier we already have our constructor function implement, right? So that's why you see here how to see the default constructor being called. So from this dynamic array template, if we wrote like this, okay, so we write the dynamic array, then we have the int. So then here actually, so that's you call your dynamic array, you pass in the data type is int. So then if you only specify a, actually when they go to the constructor function, then since you didn't give them any parameter, right? So they're just using 2. So on the other hand, your cap will be 2. So then they will create the array. The capacity is 2. So then the same thing continue. This one is the default constructor. But sometimes, how about I don't want to create the default constructor, right? So since we have our dynamic array, right? I can create my dynamic array, actually size is 1000. I still do the int. So if you do so, right, so then actually here, when they go to the constructor, they will just pass in this one is 1000. So then the cap is 1000. So that's why when they create the dynamic array, they're using the 1000 cap. So then we have 1000 elements for the int array. So that's our default constructor for our dynamic array. So continue, since we have our dynamic array, right? We have the pointer. So then you have your new keyword. So that's why after you have your array creation is using the dynamic memory, actually we have more member function we need. So then let's talk about what other member function we need. Remember, every time C++ you use the new, you need to use what? Right, the new, we need to do the delete. So that's why since you have the constructor function for the dynamic memory, so the first thing we need to have the destructor function. Then second thing, we need to have copy constructor function. So what is the copy constructor function? The copy constructor function, like here, they can be you write like this way, but this one we're using the static array, for example. Or you can have, when you create an array, they right away assign to another array. So why we need to have copy constructor function? Because here is because the equal sign. Before, when we're using the equal sign for the static array, that's okay. Equal sign for static array, they will make the copy. But equal sign, if we're using for the dynamic array, that's the problem. Because equal sign, when you assign from the object for the dynamic memory, they will assign the pointer equal to pointer. So pointer equal to pointer mean what? That means here you see you create an array. You have your dynamic memory. They're using this pointer to refer to the array memory location. But if I refer one pointer equal to the other pointer, they will refer to the same dynamic memory. Then we are in trouble because they were using the same pointer to refer to the same memory location. Then they will become a shallow copy. So the same thing here. If you have so that's why we need to have a copy constructor to make sure instead we have the shallow copy, we need to have the deep copy. Then the other one is the assignment operator function. Assignment operator function like this. I create two arrays. Okay, so then I assign each one. One to the other one, B to A. So when they are static array, they are totally fine because they are make the copy. But when they are in the dynamic array, they will assign pointer. So that's why we need to make copy constructor and assignment operator. They all need to make a deep copy instead of shallow copy. So these two I will talk about more detail, but that's finish our destructor function. So our destructor function, if you never use the destructor function, we just told you, destructor function actually very similar to the constructor function. Destructor function, the same thing, they have the same function name as the class name. The only thing is they have the tail. So that's the destructor function. So usually destructor function, we don't have any parameter. So this one is our destructor function. So destructor function, actually we just need to do one thing because we want to delete the array. So the easier way, one thing is because we only want to delete the dynamic memory. So the destructor function actually is one line. So you can just delete. We delete what? Right, we delete using the value to refer to the new array. So that's why we're using the delete value. Okay, so here your destructor function is only one line. So that's we do that. Okay, so here that's the destructor function.